Welcome to the era of deep doubt. Recognize, right? When we get to the point where propaganda isn't just what they're telling us, we're also starting to see it in the capacity of deep fakes. Okay, and this is what they're talking about. So AI has scrambled our ability to tell what's real and what's synthetic. But there are tools and techniques to help stay grounded in truth. And of course, like I said, this is a little bit of a political article. When I read this stuff, I just want to punch myself in the face because it just reeks of bias, as you would expect. But there's some interesting stuff here. So right from the top, given the flood of photorealistic AI-generated images washing over social media networks like X and Facebook these days, we're seemingly entering a new age of media skepticism. The era of what I'm calling deep doubt. While questioning, this is from the article, so I didn't say this. The author of the article said this. Who is the author of the article? Let's cite this properly. Oh goodness, I can't get the damn paywall. Okay, I'll tell you when I get it during the break here. But okay, so deep doubt. While questioning the authenticity of digital content stretches back decades and analog media long before that, easy access to tools that generate convincing fake content has led to a new wave of liars using AI-generated scenes to deny real documentary evidence. Along the way, people's existing skepticism toward online content from strangers may be reaching new heights. Now, as we always talk about, not just propaganda and fooling us and, believe nothing of what you hear and only half of what you see, back to Edgar Allan Poe, this has been something that has been in the human mind for a very long time, except we're not trained to think about it from very young. We're not trained about this stuff in school. This isn't properly taught to us on how to spot and mitigate propaganda in our lives. None of this stuff, okay? And it drives me nuts because the worst part of it is this is probably one of the most important lessons we need to discern our own true reality, okay? Now, so hang tight on that. We're going to get back to Edward Bernays and Sigmund Freud because this link goes all the way back to them in the turn of the 19th century the 1900s, 18th century, 19th century, 20th century. I don't know. I get them confused. But around 1900 is when this started to bubble up into something that was really, really, dare I say, insidious. And they're still using it against us today. And consider not just that, the idea of deepfakes is part of this. So hang tight on that. We'll get back to it. But we're talking about the era of deep doubt tonight. And not just that with everything, the political aspect, which we won't talk politics because it drives me insane. But also the next level is UFOs as the ultimate shiny object. And if Edward Bernays were alive today, would he seize on this and use it against us as the ultimate marketing tool to manipulate not just our emotions, but our fears, anxieties, and everything else about the modern world? Because I kind of think so. And so would his, let's say, proteges that learn from him be doing that to us right now? Probably. Now, the weird thing is, like I said, this goes back to Edward Bernays, which is the father of modern propaganda or marketing, okay? Because what's the difference, right? One makes you buy things, one makes you want to go to war. Interesting, right? Or something to that effect. I'm, of course, brutalizing that and boiling it down to a very simple ethic there, but you get what I mean, okay? But it goes back to Freud. Now, Freud, again, very controversial in a lot of ways because he was the precursor to Carl Jung, who we talk about quite often in terms of the collective subconscious, about the archetypes of what it means to be human in the most primordial sense, how these things actually stick with us all the time, and how we're still dealing with this stuff today, even, thousands of years after the modern human really woke up and recognized these things were happening to us. So it's wild. Okay. It's wild. And so Sigmund Freud is this. Now, there's again, controversial in a lot of ways. So he brought up the idea of the unconscious mind. And this is all the way back to, let's see, where was he born? He was born in 1856, just to kind of frame this properly. And let's see, he was doing this stuff, of course. He moved to England in 1938 and died in 39. So he was about that time, right? Kind of the late 1800s, early 1900s is when he was getting super popular. But he's got the idea of the unconscious mind, okay? This is one of his most enduring ideas. I'll just read a couple things if you guys aren't familiar. Many of us are, but just want to make sure the top to bottom makes some sense here when I'm making the case. But the unconscious mind is one of his most enduring ideas, which is that the mind is a reservoir of thoughts, memories, and emotions that lie outside the awareness of the conscious mind. obvious stuff. We talk about this quite often on Troubled Minds. Personality. So Freud proposed that personality is made up of three key elements: the id, the ego, and the superego. Again, college level stuff. Many of us have studied this and know a lot about this. Many of us don't. That's why it's important to go over it. So the ego is the conscious state, the id is the unconscious, and the superego is the moral or ethical framework that regulates how the ego operates. Conflicts and interactions between these parts make up one's personality, okay? Meaning that we are in some capacity, not even ourselves, we are programmed robots from our childhood trauma in some basic sense from what he's talking about. Life and death instincts, he says, Freud claimed that two classes of instincts, life and death, dictated human behavior. Life instincts include sexual procreation, survival, and pleasure. Death instincts include aggression, self-harm, and destruction. Psychosexual development. This is where Freud gets weird because he's probably responsible for a lot of really weird stuff, okay? Meaning his theory of psychosexual development posits that there are 5 stages of growth in which people's personalities and sexual selves evolve. These phases are the oral stage, anal stage, phallic stage, latent stage, and genital stage. Again, if you've studied this, you know it's kind of weird. Mechanisms of defense. Freud suggested that people use defense mechanisms to avoid anxiety. And these mechanisms include displacement, repression, sublimation, regression, and many more. And like I said, very controversial because he is kind of that, the penis envy, if you've heard that. He says we've all got penis envy, including females, right? It's like, I mean, I'm not sure I buy that. But again, this is old time stuff, and this is kind of the dawn of psychology, and how this kind of fits into deciphering what humans are. Now, he's the beginning of the story because exactly the top part there, the unconscious mind. And so he recognizes that there's a ton of information happening to us as people where we actually do not recognize it and recognize how it's causing us to be. And it's always manipulating us all the time, and we just don't notice it. Well, enter from Sigmund Freud, his nephew, Edward Bernays, which is, again, the godfather of modern propaganda or marketing. Now, here's the thing. So I was thinking about this, and I think in the larger context of the conversation of UFOs, I think this guy would seize on this as the ultimate marketing tool. Because specifically, like I said, UFOs are able to manipulate people in a ton of different ways. Just the idea, the concept of alien life is the most basic, is, it's one of those things that people in the UFO community are like, yeah, duh. But then a lot of normies are like, no, there's no scientific evidence for UFOs and for aliens, right? And it becomes instantly polarizing just because of people's belief systems or what they know or don't know about the topics, okay? And so think about it in terms of not just the political space of this discussion, not our discussion, the political space of propaganda. And it is polarizing by its very nature intentionally. Now, what I'm trying to make sense of tonight in my own mind and explain to you as we go tonight is that this guy, the genius of propaganda and marketing, would have loved UFOs. And I wonder if maybe I'll build a Bernays bot and based on all his books, and then see what he would do with UFOs today. That's probably a project that would be fascinating for another time. But check it out. So this is what he said. Now, the amazing quote from him, is it here? Yeah, okay. So he says, so here's the important part. So as he entered the war, this is World War I, the Committee on Public Information, the CPI, hired Bernays to work for its Bureau of Latin American Affairs, based in an office in New York. Bernays, along with Lieutenant F.E. Ackerman, focused on building support for war, domestically and abroad, focusing especially on businesses operating in Latin America. Well, that's a little weird for World War I, don't you think? It's a little bit odd, but they're still back then manufacturing public opinion worldwide. Okay? So Bernays referred to this work as psychological warfare. Oh, you don't say. Yeah, this is the guy. This is the guy responsible for the modern version of that. So after fighting ended, Bernays was a part of a 16-person publicity group working for the CPI at the Paris Peace Conference. A scandal arose from his reference to propaganda in a press release. As reported by the New York World, the, quote, announced object of the expedition is to interpret the work of the Peace Conference by keeping up a worldwide propaganda to disseminate American accomplishments and ideals, end quote, okay? Which will cause people to freak out. They're like, what? Propaganda? Americans? Ah, boo. But then he said this. Bernays later described a realization that his work for the CPI could also be used in peacetime. And this is a quote. "There was one basic lesson I learned in the CPI, that efforts comparable to those applied by the CPI to affect the attitudes of the enemy, of neutrals, and people of this country could be applied with equal facility to peacetime pursuits. In other words, what could be done for a nation at war could be done for organizations and people in a nation at peace." Oh, well, so we don't only have to manipulate each other during wartime. Now, suddenly, this is all the way back to the early 1900s. We're starting to deal with propaganda manufactured to control us from cradle to grave. That whole, as Clyde Lewis always says, shout out Ground Zero, full spectrum control. Okay. And so this is not all the stuff that we talk about here, all the stuff that we notice collectively when we have these discussions together on Troubled Minds, all these manipulations that we notice in our personal lives with not just the mass media, politics, even people around us manipulating us through subtle ways. All this stuff is in its base back to that collective unconscious of Freud, which again, Bernays used as a weapon, not just at war, but in times of peace. Now, World War I came, ended, World War II came, ended, and then out of it, the Cold War. And so we've been under a Cold War propaganda effort for nearly 100 years at this point. And so 90 years, something like that, 85, 90 years. And so this is why things are so backwards and upside down. All right. Now, this is my point. And so the question for you guys tonight is this. Do you think that given, let's say Bernays was still alive today, we're able to digitally resurrect him? I may do that, like I said, make a bot and ask his works, see if they would, what they would do with UFOs. But I think that in this particular capacity, UFOs are very much like a modern religion. Okay. And as you know, religions are incredibly polarizing, which is why we talk about this stuff together and look at it, with a critical eye, all of it, every bit of it. But I think sort of in the technological space of deep fakes, propaganda, not just political, but otherwise, I think UFOs are the perfect sort of fulcrum to drop into that and take it anywhere you want and control people in any capacity you want to. I think it's the ultimate shiny object because you can manipulate anything. Anyway, you can make them buy Oreo cookies as they did, right? You see some of the, couple years ago, we did the Summer of Saucers. They were doing marketing campaigns with actual UFOs. So, okay. And so the weird part is, and that's the question tonight. Do you think that in the propaganda space and the sense of UFOs and alien life, that it is the ultimate shiny object and it is being used against us in that capacity to not just divide, but also conquer with, again, this disclosure movement happening, which I've talked about quite a lot, that's happening in the UFO community, the whistleblowers, David Grush, back to the Bob Lazar stuff, whether you think this stuff is true or not, it's still being used against us. And I feel it and I sense it because I see all of the people just super pissed off about all the things happening, okay? And all the polarization, all the nastiness, all the infighting. And what somebody said on Twitter X, I think it was Deep Prasad, shout out Deep Neuron on Twitter X. He said, congratulations to the intelligence community, which has officially destroyed the UFO movement and the UFO community itself. That's a bad paraphrase, but he tweeted that today. And I think he's right. I think this is being used against us in the most insidious way that goes all the way back to Freud, Bernays, through Carl Jung, and of course, I'm leaving him out of it tonight because he's a whole other interesting conversation as we usually talk about him. But Bernays, in particular, we're still dealing with his style of propaganda in 2024, nearly 100 years later. What the hell is actually going on? Tonight we're taking your calls. I'm calling this Manufacturing Deep Doubt, UFOs and the Liar's Dividend. And this goes all the way back to Edward Bernays. We're talking about 1900. He was the nephew in some capacity, second removed or something like that, from the famous, infamous, and controversial psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud, who, of course, brought up the idea of the subconscious mind, the unconscious itself, as a control mechanism. And then Edward Bernays insidiously took it, not just in war, but in peace, and decided, well, maybe we could manipulate everybody, all the things, and have all of the power through sleight of hand and manipulative tactics. And so, of course, I was thinking about it as I saw this new information. Let me cite this real quick so that everybody knows what I'm talking about, so we're not dreaming here. But Dr. Brandenburg, PhD Brandenburg on Twitter X, the difference appears that the James Webb Space Telescope has found strong evidence of life on an exoplanet. Reportedly, this may have led to a classified briefing to Congress. If so, this is a dramatic step towards disclosure. All these links are in the description down below, okay? So this is where this begins tonight. And I'm not saying this is true. I'm not saying this is false. I'm saying that this level of propaganda is exactly what we're dealing with. And I think at the end of propaganda, you find UFOs. Does it make sense? It makes a ton of sense to me, because you could throw out all the binary nonsense of the political space and through science, belief, and disbelief, boil all of that down to UFOs themselves as a conversation tactic to divide and conquer. Am I right? Am I wrong? Somewhere in between.